Well, welcome everyone. Today we're going to be discussing how to migrate from PhotoView360 into SOLIDWORKS Visualize. My name is Alex Worsfold. I am a senior applications engineer here at GoEngineer. I really enjoy rendering, but I've been in this position or in this field for the last 20 years or so. I've worked in industry doing consumer design, plastic part design, also did rendering for marketing and other customer-facing imagery, things like that. I'm familiar with plastic part design, vacuum forming, and I consider myself a surfacing expert. But away from my career, I really enjoy sim racing. I play lots of different types of games, really enjoy looking at the stars. We have 2 dogs, a dachshund and a chihuahua, and I also really enjoy photography and videography. So if you have any questions on any of those topics, please email me at that email here on the screen. But for today, I want to talk about how you migrate from PhotoView into Visualize. And, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of the different rendering engines that are inside of SOLIDWORKS or that were included in SOLIDWORKS. How you can get started with Visualize, from the very start, from opening Visualize the very first time, how to use different appearances, scenes, camera, typical things you would have maybe done in PhotoView in the past, and then also the different output formats. Now, most of what we're going to be talking about today is part of Visualize Standard. So that means that anyone that's on SOLIDWORKS Professional or Premium has a license to this. However, I do want to give everyone some tools or at least some basic knowledge of what's included in Visualize Professional in case you ever decide that you want to upgrade in the future. So a little bit about, the history of rendering inside of SOLIDWORKS. And back in 97 plus, SOLIDWORKS released a product called PhotoWorks. It was based on an engine called Lightworks. A few years after that, they changed the engine to Mental Ray. It was still called PhotoWorks, but they just upgraded that engine and gave it a little bit more power. Further down the road, PhotoView360 was released. I believe this was also a standalone product. And then once they retired PhotoWorks, they actually created an integrated render preview for PhotoView inside of SOLIDWORKS as well. And, PhotoWorks lasted about 13 years before that whole transition happened. In 2017, they released a tool called Visualize Standard, and then also an upgrade to that called Visualize Professional. And it was using an engine called NVIDIA iRay. Later, they added another rendering engine called AMD ProRender. This allowed users that didn't have an NVIDIA card but still wanted to take advantage of some of the rendering capabilities within Visualize. You could use your AMD card. Finally, we've added a third engine called Dassault Systèmes Stellar. This was produced by Dassault themselves, and they've added it into the product. And the reason they did this is so that other tools that are available on the platform or available from Dassault, maybe like CATIA, those all use the same engine. And eventually moving forward, Visualize and all of those other tools will be using the same assets. And then, of course, today in 2023, PhotoView is ending. So if you have SOLIDWORKS 2023 Service Pack 5, that will be the last version that will use PhotoView360. And of course, it's been 14 years since that tool was released. Earlier this year, when they released SOLIDWORKS 2024, they created a complete overhaul to the appearance model inside of Visualize. So that means moving forward that, all the tools that are available for, CATIA and other rendering engines, we're going to start to see those become more available inside of SOLIDWORKS Visualize as well. So that's super exciting, and I can't wait to see what SOLIDWORKS does in the future. Now, as far as what the system requirements are, PhotoView was only based upon your CPU. So that means that rendering times could be quite slow if you didn't have a really fast processor. But today, In Visualize, it's a hybrid approach where you can use both the CPU and the GPU in order to render, any scenes, animations, things like that. As far as, what hardware is supported, any of the NVIDIA umbrella is supported. So Quadro, GeForce, those gaming graphics cards that you might have around the house, or Tesla graphics cards that are based more for compute models. However, those cards do need to be newer than Maxwell. So if you have any old Quadro FX cards laying around, those aren't going to be useful anymore. And you do need to be up to date on a newer driver from NVIDIA, starting with at least 52895. If you don't have an NVIDIA card, but you want to still be able to render, as long as you have Vulkan support on a graphics card, so both AMD and NVIDIA support those, you could use the ProRender, or you're just not going to be able to have all the advantages of iRay and Stellar with if you don't have an NVIDIA card. And then lastly, there's a function in Visualize called denoiser. You need to have at least 4 gigabytes of RAM in order to use this feature. And we'll talk about what this does as we move forward. If you're not sure at all if Visualize is compatible with your system, the first time you open it up, I would suggest going into Help and taking a look at the system info so that you can see if there's any red flags where you might want to get IT involved and upgrade your system. All right, so let's talk about how do we use Visualize? Like what do we need to be looking at when we start the tool for the first time? So Visualize is a standalone application. There is no integrated preview in SOLIDWORKS just yet. It's only within a standalone window. I have no idea. I don't have a crystal ball to know if an integrated preview will come. Maybe it will. We're just not sure yet. As far as like the resolution within Visualize, if you've ever started Visualize for the first time, you'll notice you get this really tiny little preview window in the center of your screen, how you go about changing that. So we're going to talk about some of these common settings that people might want to change right in the beginning. And then also importing. SOLIDWORKS has simplified the import method. There's really only 2 methods now for SOLIDWORKS components. So we'll talk about both of those methods in the next slide here. So first of all, when you open up Visualize for the first time, I would suggest going into Options, going into your viewport settings, and making a couple of changes. Of course, you've got the 3 rendering engines that we talked about, but you can choose to enable or disable your CPU there with those settings. And then right here, this maximum resolution. So originally it starts, at a smaller resolution. I would suggest setting it to fill window. Denoiser, if your graphics card has at least 4 gigabytes of memory, you'll see this option here. I would suggest turning that on. Also over here under user interface, standard navigation, easy mode. So if you don't want it to start in a condensed view, I would suggest turning that off. And then also your theme. I'd like to use the dark theme just because it's easier on the eyes. It's more contrasty. It just makes it a little bit easier to see what's going on in the interface. So now that we've got some basic settings figured out, how do we import something into Visualize? Well, right from within Windows Explorer, I can just drag and drop a file out of my files in Windows into SOLIDWORKS. And I'm using Visualize Standard here, so we're only going to get the options that are available to me in Standard. We're just going to use the appearance mode for right now to import this just to see kind of what happens. So once this finishes importing, you're going to notice a few things going on. I like to change my layout over here to, you can either have it at the top or on the left-hand side. So it is collapsible. Just makes it easier to find things when it's on the left-hand side like that. So I'm going to go ahead and switch it to that mode. In the graphics area here, you have different preview modes. So that green button there, that's your normal kind of view that you would see inside of SOLIDWORKS. This is not rendering at all. The yellow button is only available to NVIDIA cards. This is ray tracing. So if your card supports it, you'll see that option. And then the orange button is full-on path tracing. So this is what normal rendering inside of SOLIDWORKS, PhotoView, PhotoWorks has done, for many years. We also have filters. So if you want to be able to select the model, you can see it highlights over there on the left or on the right. You can select based on group or based on individual parts, and you can see it highlights over there on the right in that tree. If I double click on an object in the graphics area, you see it actually highlights the appearance that was applied from SOLIDWORKS. We also have a filter here for appearances. So in the graphics area, if I select something, it's going to select the appearance that's assigned to that specific object. Now I can also hide components. So here I'm using Shift H in order to hide everything except for that object. And the way that I imported this was based on the appearance. So you see here, when I hide that one object, it hides both bodies. But that was because that specific appearance was assigned to those bodies. So it's grouped it into like one component here inside of Visualize. Well, let's talk about a different way that we could import this to have, some greater flexibility. So let's open this assembly in SOLIDWORKS instead of Visualize first. And if we take a look at the feature tree, we're going to see that there's a lot more info going on here. There's quite a bit more part names, and I didn't see any of this inside of Visualize. Instead, what we saw was all of the appearances. So we actually had one body in Visualize for each one of these appearances. It's not exactly what we wanted. I'd like to see the individual component names instead. So to do this from SOLIDWORKS, we can just use this Export Advanced option. So by using this option, this gives us the most flexibility in order to move individual components around and apply different appearances and colors to those individual bodies or components without having to go through any additional steps. So now inside of Visualize, we can see, each part and, all of the appearances come across, but it's also monitoring the file. Now, there was a change that I had, forgot to resolve in SOLIDWORKS first before I imported it. So let's go back into SOLIDWORKS. And we'll just remove this hole. So let's open up this part. And let's find the hole over in the tree. There it is. Of course, we could edit it if we want to make a change, but I'm just going to go ahead and delete that. And my dialog box is off the screen. So there we go. And oops, I should have deleted the sketch as well. Let's go ahead and remove that. Let's save this part, go back to the assembly. And of course, the assembly is up to date. Let's go ahead and save our assembly as well. And as soon as we make that change and save that document, Visualize is going to be up to date, or at least it's going to prompt us to be up to date. So if we go back into Visualize, we see, hey, the source data has been modified. Do you want to re-import? So as soon as I click yes, boom, the geometry is up to date. So if I had any different appearances, cameras, scenes, lighting, things like that I've already done to my project, all of that would still be intact. It's just the geometry that has updated. Now, speaking of like geometry and components, again, if I double click on a component, it's going to highlight that component. Now, I hid all of the other components except for that specific appearance. But if you look in the tree here, I have more control now. So I can hide the individual battery component. It's not, a group of bodies based on the appearance. I have full control of it, just like I would inside of SOLIDWORKS. All right. So that was getting started. Let's talk about some appearances, how to change the scene, and the camera. We'll talk about the differences between the local and cloud libraries, how to apply appearances from either the project that you started with or from the library, and then also if you have appearances that you've already saved inside of SolidWorks, those get imported into Visualize. How would you go about saving those back to your library for future use? And changing the environment. The environment is your source of all of the ambient light within the scene. You can add different backplates for like a photograph or an image in the background. And we'll also talk about editing cameras. All right, so over here in Visualize, we can see all of the appearances that are assigned to my current project. Now I can reuse these at any point in time. So maybe, for example, this dark powder coated version, if I want to just apply that, I can drag and drop it onto any of the other parts here inside of SolidWorks or inside of Visualize. If I want to find maybe something new, I could go over to the library here. Now notice at the top of the library, we've got two options, cloud and local. And anything in the cloud here that's got these green checks, those means that they've already been downloaded. Any of the other ones, I just need to click this little circle in the middle and it's going to go ahead and download those additional appearances. So there are a lot of appearances that are omitted during the initial install of Visualize. So I would suggest going into the cloud and then finding appearances that you're going to use on a common basis and just download those so you don't need to waste time in the future. But again, I can just drag and drop these appearances straight out of my library from the cloud and apply them to my project. Now, every time that we drag and drop an appearance from the library, it gets saved and stored within the project here under the Appearances tab. So you can see that those appearances that I've dragged and dropped, even though I'm not using that white one anymore, it's still here in my project. Now, if I want to reuse these, just like before, I can drag and drop out of my project and drop it onto the model. Now, there's also a shortcut here. If I have an appearance selected, and then by holding Shift and then right mouse button, instead of dragging and dropping, you can just click on those individual components that you want to apply that material to. We can also make changes to this. So for example, this green color here, I want it to match the color and the GoEngineer logo. So I'm going to change this to the GoEngineer color. You can see I'm using a hex code there. And I can rename this. So instead of green high gloss, let's call this GoEngineer or GoE green. And I want to save this to my library. Of course, I could change other things too, but I just want to export this in its current state. So I'll go ahead and save it into the plastics folder there. Or sorry, into the high gloss plastics folder there. So if we look under our local and high gloss, there it is, the green, GoEngineer green. Let's go ahead and grab a couple of other colors here. So let's put some black in there. And again, you only need to drag and drop that once. And then once it's in the project, you can just, hold Shift and right click and paste it onto any other components at the same time. And of course, we can bring over some other appearances. Let's add some chrome here to that base plate. And we'll just copy it from the base plate to these components here, some hardware and the reciprocating saw. And there we go. Let's see. Maybe I want to change the color of this. I have full control over the color. There's different modes. Right now I'm in RGB mode, so I can select or adjust red, green, and blue individually. We also have swatches here, different palettes that we can choose from. So I could maybe pick a cool gray color here. And maybe I want an extra saw in here. So let's go over to the model tab and I'll just duplicate this. Notice the hotkeys there. So Control D would be duplicate. I can then move this around. So I could just slide it along this plane. I also have some quick tools here where I can just flip this 90 degrees really quickly and then snap it to the floor. And I'm just kind of rotating this around and kind of getting it in place where I want it. You'll notice that when it snapped it to the floor, it just used the lower edge of the model there, but I can be a little bit more precise and kind of rotate this around until it's looks like it's actually like sitting on the floor. All right, so that orientation looks pretty good. Let's also slide the other main assembly here. We'll slide that down so that it's kind of sitting on the base and not at the end of that saw blade. So that looks nice. I don't really like the position of this one over here. Let's kind of move it out, rotate it a bit. And that triad right now is aligned to the world. I do have a choice to align it to the component itself, but aligning it to the world just makes it a lot easier to move and slide that around on the basic planes there. Now, all of these cameras were imported from SOLIDWORKS. So any camera views that you've got saved inside of SOLIDWORKS, those do come across. We really just need this viewport here. We can adjust other things like, twist. You can also use the keyboard shortcuts that you're familiar with in SOLIDWORKS. So holding the Alt key in the middle button will twist as well. We can also create depth separation or depth of field. So maybe I just want to focus on the logo. So if I'm like zoomed in to the model here, and then we'll pick the focal point again. So maybe the front face of this housing. Now you can see the component in the background is a little bit more blurred out. Just kind of drawing attention to the front of the jigsaw. Now these are back plates. So the background that's in the scene, I'm just going to delete those for right now. There were two environments that were already in the project. So I can just kind of clean that up and get rid of the ones that I don't need. Of course, we could choose maybe a different style of lighting environment. So maybe I want to try this directional light here. And these environments are really the source of all of the ambient light within the scene. We do have some control over these like brightness and gamma. So for example, let's kind of find one that we're happy with here. And that looks pretty good. We can go back to the scene here. So I can flatten the floor. That'll give me a little bit better reflections from the floor into the model. So the light kind of bounces off of the part a little bit more. And of course, I could spend all day playing around with the environments, but I think we'll move on here. Let's talk about some output formats. So Visualize Standard only has two output modes that are available, either snapshot or images. Snapshots is probably the quickest way that you can just create a whole bunch of renderings all at one time, just straight out of the graphics area. And then the images, that's where you can really fine tune the resolution and the size of your images for some really high quality content. So let's talk about snapshots first. So if we go up to this button here, which is the render wizard. So we've got two modes here, snapshot and image. There's different presets here. You can create your own presets, but I'm just going to use the JPEG mode. You can see that there are different formats here. So JPEG, bitmap, TIFF, and so on. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the output folder for the project, and this will remain the same going forward for this specific file. So I'm going to make a new folder here called Jigsaw. And we'll just select that folder. And the job is just Jigsaw 2. Okay, so you notice that when I clicked OK there, it saved a snapshot with the current resolution and number of passes in my graphics area here. But now I can go ahead and just rotate to a new position, and then using Control and P on the keyboard, I can save a new snapshot into the same file and folder that I had picked earlier. I can even reset like depth of field. And then really all I need to do is wait for the number of passes to increase enough to where I don't see any graininess in the scene anymore, and then save another snapshot. So I can continue to do this process and continue to render, what's ever in the graphics area, just kind of like a preview. Maybe I just want to show a couple of colleagues something. I'm not really looking for high quality images. I'm just looking for something that's good enough to send to the rest of my team here. So I just need to wait a few seconds, and then again, just hit Control P, and it's going to save those files into that same folder. So if I bring my folder over, I can see all the work that I've been doing. It's just collating all of those images into the one folder. And of course, I can go back through and look at my work and maybe, email these to the rest of my team. All right. So what about high quality images? So let's go back to the output tool and let's look at image. So again, we have different presets here. We'll just use the 4K high quality one for now. Again, different formats, just like on the other one. We're going to stick with PNG. We can redefine the size of the resolution if needed, but again, that's determined by that profile. We'll go ahead and keep the number of passes. Again, we need to select which folder we want to save this into. I'm just going to go ahead and pick the same Jigsaw folder. But the difference here is whatever the job name is here, when we create these high quality images, it's going to create a new folder for this image. So just remember that once you go to render, there's going to be another folder there called Jigsaw 4K. Now this is a pretty high end image, and you'll notice here that as it's rendering that we only get like half of the preview showing at one time. And this is, you remember in PhotoView or PhotoWorks that, as it was rendering, you could watch the little squares kind of go around the screen and kind of, paint the image as it went. Visualize does the same thing. The cubes are just much bigger in size. So in this case, it's just half of the screen. So the longer I let this render progress, you can see it's going to take about 9 minutes to render. Eventually, it's going to continue rendering the full image. And it looks like that's going to take it took 11 minutes to finish. And we can go and find that folder. So again, here's that Jigsaw 4K folder, and there's the final image. We can open that up and look at it full screen. And you can see there's quite a bit more detail and a lot better resolution and quality than those snapshot images. All right. So that's everything that Visualize Standard can do. There are a couple of tips that I want to squeeze in here at the last minute. So let's take a look at a couple of tips and tricks before we take a look at the, what's in Visualize Pro. So this is a question that I get asked a lot is, hey, I've got like 400 components in here. They're all Chrome. How do I make them red? Okay, so we'll talk about how to copy appearances to multiple components at once. Also, lighting. This is another thing that comes up. Visualize Standard does not have the ability to add additional light sources. However, there is a way to make your own. So we're going to talk about how to create emissive appearances with some other object. And then also some other navigation tips. Sometimes you can get lost in the render preview area. How do you kind of render or rope it back into the right position? So let's talk about these. So how do you copy appearances? Well, this is a typical scenario. I'll go over into my appearances list, and let's say I want to change all of these parts to blue. So I could drag and drop this multiple times onto each one of these components, but there's a better way. So I'm going to hit undo, and instead I'm just going to drag and drop this into the graphics area. So what that does is it copies the appearance into the project. And let's kind of expand this window a little bit. There we go. So this blue appearance down here, it's not assigned to anything right now, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy it. And then I can just choose another appearance and assign the copied appearance to the green one. Okay, to the green component. Same thing with chromium. I've got a whole bunch of chrome parts here. Let's say I want to use polished steel instead. Again, I can copy it or just Control C on the keyboard and then right click and assign that copied appearance. So it kind of like replaces it. It doesn't remove the old appearance from the tree, but it allows me to quickly switch between different appearances. Now, here's another thing. Visualize does have the ability to create primitive models. So you can see there's a whole bunch of different types of models that we can insert. Let's insert a plane. Oop, wrong button there. Let's go back. So we're going to insert a plane, and then I'll scale it and rotate it so that it's like above the model here. I'm going to switch over to this absolute mode. And this is so that I can see this arrow here. I want this arrow, the green arrow, pointing back towards the model. Because apparently light only is emitted from one side of surfaces. So that's how you can tell which side is emitting the light, is with this little green arrow here. So we need to create a new light appearance. So I'm going to create a new appearance just from a right click, and I'm going to assign the type as emissive and change its color just to white. Let's assign this. And now that plane is emitting light into the scene. And I can see this because if I turn the background off and then turn the environment brightness down to 0, I can see that the light is coming in off of that plane. I can't see my ground, so let's turn on some reflection here in the scene, and then also some roughness to get that light to bounce around. And you can see that caustics isn't really required, but I turned it on here just because. But you can see that light from that plane is the only source of light now in this scene. Well, what if I want a different type? Let's add a sphere. And let's scale it. So I need to switch to my other filter here and then scale. And let's slide it over here to the right. And let's create a copy of this so I can duplicate, which is also Control D on the keyboard. And then we'll just assign that duplicated appearance. I didn't have to duplicate it, but I want it to be a different color. So I'll switch it to, let's say, red, and maybe increase the intensity. So let's go by a factor of 10. So there we go. 2 different light sources. One is a sphere, one is a plane, but I can, easily add my own light sources to the scene in Visualize Standard. There's also an option here called faded. Now, visible will just turn the light on and off for good, but faded will hide the object so that it's not being seen by the camera. So that means that we can create these light sources that are kind of invisible from the camera, but still, throw light into the scene. Now, the best of both worlds here is to kind of, bring back in some ambient light as well. And so now I don't need to have such bright ambient light coming in from my background. And I can still have those 2 additional light sources. They're just they're not sources here within the scene tree. You just have to remember that they're part of your model and part of your appearances. Here's another trick. If I want to bounce around within the scene as far as how I navigate, I can hit Control, Alt, and right mouse button. So what that does is wherever your cursor is at, so Control Alt mouse button, that's going to set it as the center point of the view. So if I do that somewhere out here, now it's rotating about that point out in space. So if I happen to do that, and I want to get back to, looking at the model, I can easily just use Control, Alt, and right mouse button will center that object. Now, sometimes you might want to have an actual object be in the center of your screen. So you can use the Home key. So I just select the component that I want to be centered in the screen, press Home, and it's going to center that object within the screen. And these are all tools that we've had in SOLIDWORKS for years too, right? You've got that zoom to selection. That's kind of like zoom to select here in Visualize. So again, that's with the Home key. At the end of this, I have a link to all the hotkeys that I'm using in my presentation. And there's a PDF that you can download and print out. It's like a printer-friendly version. I'll show you the link here once we get closer to the end. All right. So we can, again, we can move these lights around. This is one other trick that I wanted to show. So the environment, if I change the pivot point of that object to be the environment, now I can rotate that light around from this triad in the middle of the screen. And you can see that light source or the reflection on the jigsaw is updating as I rotate this. And if I turn that light source back on again, you can see it's like rotating the object from that specific point in the graphics area. So it makes it really easy to, adjust the position of the lights without needing Visualize Pro just to add this feature. So again, really nice tip that you can use to shed some light on your objects. All right. Next up, let's talk about Visualize Professional features. So you actually get quite a few things in Visualize Pro. And we're going to talk about all of them. So animations, so the ability to import animations from SOLIDWORKS or even create animations in Visualize, you can do that. There's a product called Boost. Again, this is included with Visualize Pro. We'll explain how it works and how to turn it on. Interactive images, what those are, how to create them. Matching camera to the backplate. You can create different configurations of objects. So your scene, backplate, camera, appearances, all of those can be saved to what Visualize calls a configuration so that you can recall it at any point without having to go through a whole bunch of different settings. Camera filters. So these are things like saturation, different color filters, bloom, that kind of thing. These are things that I would typically do after it's been rendered. So maybe like in like a third-party editing tool, you don't have to do that. You can edit those changes into the file as you render it with camera filters. And then lastly, the queue. So if you want to stack up a bunch of images to be rendered and walk away for the rest of the day, you can do that. Now, number one, if you're like me and you have several licenses at your company, you might have both Visualize Pro and Visualize Standard available to you. So if you open up your network license manager, you can just change the order. So you can see right now, Standard is at the top. So I've only been using Standard features, but now I want to use Visualize Professional features. So I'm just going to move it up in the list. So now the next time that I open up Visualize, I'll be using the Visualize Professional version. So back here in SOLIDWORKS, I've got an animation that I've created, just a simple motor turning some gears. And I just want to import this into Visualize to show how it works. So all I need to do is use that Export Advanced button. I can select which motion study I want to use. Next thing I'm looking at is the timeline of that animation here in Visualize. Now, of course, you can do other things. You can add keyframes, motion blur. So for example, on this Advanced tab, I can add some motion blur. So now when it renders, it blurs the motion between the frames, kind of giving it the appearance that that part is moving super fast. And also add keyframes to individual components. So for example, the covers here, all I'm doing is I'm pressing K on the keyboard to start a new keyframe, move the playhead to a new spot, and then move the component. So I can easily create keyframes and animate components here inside of Visualize. Adding lights. So for example, I want to add a new light to my scene here. So all I need to do is right click over here in the Environments tab, add a new light, and then pick the target of where that light needs to be placed. So all I did is I just pick within that section there, and I skipped ahead too far. Let's go back. So all I'm doing is I'm just clicking within the area of the model there, and it's going to illuminate that area. And that looks pretty good, but I have full control over that light. So using the Move tool, I don't have to go through all the steps of adding another model and appearances and whatnot. I can just add that light directly into the Scenes tab. Here, what I'm doing is, now that I'm kind of like done setting up my scene, I need an extra bit of horsepower to render. I'm using this off of a laptop, but I've got a desktop off to my side on the same network that has several graphics cards in it. I want to utilize all the power of that specific machine. So I can do that in options here with Boost. So all I need to do is connect to that remote server. Boost is installed and running on that server. And now I can use this button here, which is Power Boost, and it's going to offload all of the rendering compute power to the server and transmit it back to my laptop. Now, as I render, I can do the same thing. So instead of rendering using my laptop, I can use this Power Boost button here, and instead it'll use that server to render with much faster than it would on my laptop. So you can see I'm rendering the entire animation here. There's probably 120 frames that it's going to go through. It's only going to take that server about 25, 26 minutes in order to finish. So here's that finished animation. And this is actually set at only about 100 or so passes. But this is really excellent quality for something that only took 25 minutes to render. If you were to try to do this with like PhotoView, you're going to be waiting a few hours for this to render, maybe even a day for something like this to render. What are interactive images? Let's take a look. So in SOLIDWORKS or in Visualize here, you'll notice that there's a certain angle to where, like, once I get to the top, it's about 73 degrees, and right here is about 4 degrees. So what I want to do is I want to create an image that is interactive for my client or for my customer. So I can set, how many orbits do I want to do to rotate around this thing? So we're going to go 8 orbits at 24 images per orbit. And then I'm going to set my start angle from 4 degrees to 70 degrees. And that's the range of view that the client will be able to look at this object. I'm just going to keep the resolution low here so it doesn't take all day to render. And I am going to go ahead and use my laptop to render this. It doesn't take a ton of horsepower for this specific type. We'll go ahead and put that again in my Jigsaw folder here. And we'll call it Jigsaw Interactive, or Interactive Jigsaw. All right. And if we look at the details for this, we should see it's only going to take me about 6 minutes or so to render out all these images. So once it's finished, what do we get? Well, this is what you get. So you get a set of files in that folder that you can open up this HTML file, and this is what the client would be able to view. So you could either send them the whole package and just, let them know to open up this HTML, or this is also something that you could put on your website. So you could take this whole package of files, put it onto your web server, and it doesn't require any other viewers or anything in order to use it. It's just strictly JavaScript in the background, which is part of Chrome now, and anyone can view and look at these files and be able to interact with it. So these are really handy for websites where you might want to show someone like, this is what it's going to look like when it's finished, or this is what the object looks like. Matching camera to backplate. Again, this is a pro feature that they introduced a couple of years ago, but sometimes matching the perspective angle to a backplate is just super complex to do, especially if you don't know what that angle is. So by using this match camera function, I can start to place these lines into lines that I can see on my background. So I'll just kind of line this up to this upper edge here. We'll take this one and align it to the lower edge. So that's going to be for my X direction. And then for my Z direction, I'll just place these kind of on the floor here. So I'll place this one over here. And then we'll take this one and let's use the railing up here. And notice that it almost instantaneously, as I get it aligned to that railing, now things just look correct now. And so at this point in time, my view is kind of locked to that perspective, but now I can change the scale and position to make it look as if this saw really lives within this world now. And it's kind of matched to the perspective angle of that background. Configurations. So configurations is a way that I can save multiple settings into one setting here. So I'm going to create a new one for dark stage. And let's also create one for the wooden stage. So for the wooden stage, we want to use this background and then this camera. And then we also want to use this environment. So, in standard, I'd have to go and switch those each time I wanted to go and render that image. But now I could just switch back and forth between these two. So I can save those as configurations within my project. Now I can also apply different camera filters to each one of those cameras. So maybe I want to add some vignette or maybe color filters here. So I can maybe change the color tone of the entire scene. Let's just go back to white. We change some vignetting. So this kind of simulates an edge that might be just poking out from the edge of the camera, over the edge of the lens. We can add bloom. It's kind of like light bleed over, bright areas. There's different filters here. So tune filters that we can set. And again, all of these settings can be applied to each camera individually. So I can go back to my wooden stage here and just turn on post-processing for this scene as well. And again, I could spend all day playing with filters, but the goal here is that, you would spend some time and adjust the scene here and visualize first without having to render it and then do post-processing on the image later. You can do that all within the engine, within Visualize. It's all about saving time. Last up is the queue. So Visualize Pro comes with this additional queue feature here. So from the output window, when we go to render these, of course, we've got all the different types, but when we get to the output section here, by the way, I'm going to use Boost to render these, and we'll just save this under a specific job name. We'll just call this stages. But remember our configurations that we created? So I can be selective about which configurations that I want to render and then send these all to the queue at one time. So now it's just going to gather up all the files that it needs to render those and send them over to the queue server. So the queue server is on my local laptop, but I also chose that option for Boost. So it's going to use my secondary server machine to render that out in the background. And because it's sending it over to the queue, that means that I could completely switch to a different project here. So I'm going to go ahead and close and save the project that I'm currently working on and open up a completely different project. The queue is still rendering in the background. It's using all the resources from my server. So you can see it's still rendering there in the background. And we're just waiting for the project to save. Do I want to discard this? No, I don't want to discard anything. We just want to open up that other project. Give it a second here to finally open. It's initializing that project. There we go. So now I want to render this one as well. So we'll go ahead and create an animation. We'll just do an HD version. We'll also use the Boost server for this. Let's just do 100 passes. And we'll go ahead and put that on the desktop as well. And we'll send this to the queue. And at this point, once it's been sent to the queue, like I can close Visualize now. And you can see that the queue is really the one that's gathering these images to be rendered. So now the images for the jigsaw are going to get rendered, and then later it will render that second animation. And really, I can close all the applications on my machine for the day and just go home. I do need to leave the machine running because this server is what's controlling, what jobs are being sent to the render powerhouse machine, the Boost machine. So I do need to leave this machine on while it's receiving these files from the render server. All right, so that is everything. We talked about how to get started with Visualize Standard, how do you use it, how do you import things, and then we also talked about the different features within Visualize Pro. I mentioned a hot sheet or a hotkey favorites reference sheet. So take a screenshot, or if you use a phone, you can download a PDF of this file that is printer friendly in black and white that you can stick on your wall. I actually have a copy in the background. You can probably even see it in my camera here. But all of my different hotkeys that I use, I have it right here on the wall. And of course, you can create your own. So using the F12 key, you can define your own hotkeys. There's a whole list of things that you can adjust and visualize. Some you can't change. They're just like system defaults, but of course you can create your own. With that, Are there any questions? If you can't think of any questions right now, at least write down my email address that you can get in touch with me. If you've ever got questions about Visualize or any kind of complex modeling things that you want to do in SOLIDWORKS, feel free to reach out to me.